It was a quiet Thursday morning on the south side of Atlanta, the kind of morning where the air still carries the scent of dew on grass, and the birds haven't yet grown tired of singing. Miss Eleanor Johnson, a proud 78-year-old black woman, with a head full of silver curls and a heart full of stories, was busy tending to her rose bushes outside her modest but well-kept home. She'd lived in that house for over 40 years. It wasn't just a home. It was a place filled with memories, laughter, love, and most importantly, family. Miss Eleanor had raised 3 children here after losing her husband at a young age. The youngest of her children, Marcus Johnson, had always been the quiet one, the thinker. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. Most folks in the neighborhood only knew that Marcus had gone into the military. They had no idea he'd become one of the most elite soldiers in the U.S., a Delta Force commander. But Miss Eleanor didn't brag. She'd never been one for boasting, and Marcus liked it that way. That morning, Miss Eleanor was humming an old Mahalia Jackson tune while she watered the pink roses her late husband had planted decades ago. The world felt safe and still, but trouble doesn't always come with a warning. A white van rolled slowly down the street and parked just a few houses away. No one thought anything of it. It had ladders on top and a logo that looked like a local plumbing company. The men who stepped out wore reflective vests and carried toolboxes. They looked like they belonged. No one questioned them, not the mailman who passed by, not the jogger with headphones in, and not Miss Eleanor, who was now heading back inside to make herself some tea. The doorbell rang. She opened it slowly, careful like always, and found 2 smiling men on her porch. "Good morning, ma'am," one of them said with a warm grin. "We're here to check on a possible water line leak. City records say it might be coming from under your house. Won't take but a few minutes." Miss Eleanor was skeptical. She hadn't called anyone, but their uniforms looked official. Their van was parked right, and they spoke with that smooth, practiced confidence. "Well," she said, clutching her sweater tighter, "if it's from the city, then go ahead. But I'm watching you." She didn't see the quick smirk that passed between the 2 men as they stepped inside. Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, Marcus was running a covert training drill in the Mojave Desert. A satellite phone buzzed on the hood of a Humvee. One of the soldiers handed it over. "Commander Johnson, it's from Atlanta. Something about your mother." Marcus's expression shifted instantly. He didn't ask questions. He didn't waste time. Within minutes, he was airborne, headed back east, heart pounding in his chest. Back in Atlanta, Miss Eleanor was realizing something wasn't right. The 2 men weren't checking any pipes. One of them had gone into her bedroom, and the other kept glancing at her purse. Her instincts kicked in. She had raised 3 kids on her own. She'd survived tougher times. But now she was 78. Her knees ached. Her hands trembled. And she was outnumbered. "I don't see why y'all need to be back there," she said sharply. "No problem, ma'am," the taller one said, walking out of her bedroom, not even pretending anymore. "We'll just finish up and be out your way." But Eleanor saw what was in his hand. A velvet box from her late husband, her most treasured keepsake. Something inside her snapped. "You put that down right now," she said, voice trembling. Not from fear, but from anger. The men exchanged a glance. The mask of fake professionalism fell away completely. "You don't want trouble, old lady," one said coldly. But just as they prepared to bolt, pockets full of stolen jewelry, eyes set on the cash jar above the fridge, a knock echoed from the front door. It wasn't frantic, it wasn't angry. It was calm, intentional, like the person on the other side knew exactly what was going on. The thieves froze. The shorter one peeked through the curtain and cursed under his breath. "It's a soldier." "What?" "Looks like military. Full gear, standing like he's done this before." Before they could move, the door slowly creaked open, and there stood Marcus. He didn't yell. He didn't move fast. He just looked at the 2 men with a coldness that could freeze air. "Step away from my mother," he said quietly. The taller thief made the mistake of reaching for something. Maybe a screwdriver, maybe something more dangerous, but Marcus moved like lightning. 1 second he was across the room. The next, the man was on the floor, gasping for breath. The second thief ran for the back door, but Marcus didn't chase. Instead, he pulled out his phone, pressed a button and said, "Target on foot east. Alley. Lock him down." Outside, a black SUV peeled around the corner. The second man didn't get far. Inside, Miss Eleanor stood shaking, staring at her son, her quiet, soft-spoken boy, now transformed into something else entirely. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Marcus walked over and gently took her hand, his voice softer now. "They'll never touch you again, Mama." But even as the police arrived and the neighborhood filled with sirens and flashing lights, there was a strange silence in Miss Eleanor's eyes. A deep sadness, not from the robbery, but from the fact that this was the world she now lived in. A world where even an old woman watering her roses wasn't safe, and Marcus knew in his heart that protecting his mother today was just the beginning. Elsewhere, in another corner of the country, a young black teen named Elijah was boarding a crowded bus. He spotted a tired, pregnant white woman struggling to stay on her feet. Without hesitation, he gave up his seat, offering it to her with a soft smile. She sat down, stunned by his kindness. And just before getting off the bus, she handed him a folded note. He unfolded it and stared. What it said would change his life forever. But that's another story. Elijah stared at the note, his fingers tightening around the edges. It was small, folded neatly into a square, like something a teacher might pass in class. The woman hadn't said a word when she handed it to him, just looked him in the eyes, tired, grateful, but also like she knew something he didn't. The bus door had closed behind her with a hiss, and now he was left sitting, heart beating a little faster, wondering what in the world could be inside. He glanced around. No one was paying him any attention. Most folks were staring at their phones or looking out the windows like they always did. Elijah unfolded the note slowly, his eyes scanning the words. The handwriting was shaky but elegant, as if the writer had taken her time. Kindness-like. "Yours is rare. If you ever need help, call this number. Tell them Hannah sent you. They'll listen." There was a phone number at the bottom, no explanation, no signature beyond the name. Hannah. He folded it back up, slipped it in his backpack, and leaned back against the bus window, thoughts spinning. Who was she? And why would she say something like that? He wasn't anyone special. Just a 17-year-old, high school kid trying to keep his grades up and stay out of trouble. But something about the way she looked at him, it hadn't felt random. It was like she knew more than she should have. Back in Atlanta, Marcus stood outside his mother's home, arms folded tight, watching as the police officers took statements and bagged evidence. Miss Eleanor was wrapped in a blanket on the porch, sipping lukewarm tea with both hands. Her eyes didn't blink much. She just stared out at the street like she was watching a memory fade. Marcus hated this part, the aftermath. He'd seen it too many times in too many countries. Victims shaken but quiet. Law enforcement doing their job but never fast enough. And the feeling in the pit of his stomach. Like no matter how hard he trained, how sharp his reflexes were, he still couldn't stop the bad things before they happened to the people he loved. An officer walked over. "Mr. Johnson, we're going to need your statement too." "I'm not Mr. Johnson," Marcus said without turning. "I'm Commander Johnson." The officer blinked, then nodded quickly and stepped away to check with his sergeant. Marcus didn't care about rank. He just wanted answers. Who were those men? Why this house? And how had they known Miss Eleanor lived alone? He already had some theories. The men weren't amateurs. They moved too clean, too smooth. No forced entry, fake utility van. They knew where to look. Went. Straight for the bedroom, the valuables. This wasn't a random burglary. It was targeted. He pulled out his phone and opened a secure military-grade app. He typed in a few keywords. Atlanta elderly burglary organized crew posing as city workers. A few results came up. There had been other reports in the past month. Different neighborhoods, similar stories. Always elderly victims, always minorities. But no arrests yet. Just loose threads and unanswered questions. Marcus clenched his jaw. He knew that kind of precision didn't come from street thugs. It came from structure, like someone was running an operation, and someone like that wouldn't stop until they got what they came for. Across town, Elijah stepped off the bus and walked the few blocks to his apartment building. The note burned a hole in his mind the whole way. He wanted to ignore it, pretend it was just a nice gesture, a thank you from a stranger. But deep down, something told him it wasn't that simple. His mom, Denise, was already home, cooking dinner with the TV playing in the background. Elijah dropped his bag by the couch and washed his hands at the sink. "You're quiet today," she said, stirring the pot. "Everything good at school?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, just tired." Denise glanced over. She had that look. Mothers always do. The one that could read everything he didn't say. "You eat lunch?" "Yeah." "You get into anything?" "No." She didn't press further, just handed him a spoon. "Taste this." He took a bite. It was perfect, like always. Still, even with the food, the warmth, the comfort of being home, Elijah couldn't stop thinking about the woman on the bus, her eyes, her voice, that folded note. He pulled it out again later that night, staring at the number by the glow of his phone screen. Across the country, Commander Johnson wasn't sleeping either. He had pulled surveillance footage from 2 blocks over and fed it through a facial recognition program he kept off the books. The taller man came back as Darren Mack, ex-con with ties to a private security firm that had gone bankrupt after a major lawsuit. The shorter one, Luis Ramirez, had no digital footprint after 2019. That was suspicious enough by itself. It meant someone had scrubbed his data. He tapped the screen, then called an old contact from his days in Langley. "I need a favor," he said without greeting. "Name it." "Someone's hitting black elders in Atlanta, posing as workers. They knew who my mother was, and they weren't there for cash." There was a pause. Then, "How sure are you?" "Too sure." "You think this is bigger than a string of break-ins?" Marcus exhaled through his nose. "I think it's coordinated, and I think someone's collecting more than jewelry." The voice on the other end went quiet. Then a click. Marcus sat back, staring at the night through the blinds. He hadn't told his mother yet, but something was eating at him. They hadn't taken much from the house, but one thing was gone. A small framed photo from her bedroom shelf. One with his father in uniform, standing next to a younger Marcus in full ROTC gear. Why take that? What possible reason would someone have to steal a photograph, unless they knew exactly who she was, and who he was? And now they were sending message. The next morning, Miss Eleanor got a letter in the mail with no return address. Inside, only one thing: a printed photo of her house taken from across the street. The timestamp showed it was taken 2 days before the robbery. No words, no threats, just a photo. But it said everything, and the storm was only just beginning.